Sentry here.
Hood Outlaws and Legends is a new multiplayer game from Sumo Newcastle and Focus Home Interactive that clearly wants to do something a little different with the genre of which it is a part. Thankfully, given the game's steady sense of progression, a decent amount of flexibility, and just enough overall depth, Hood can easily turn a quick dry run into a lengthy and delightfully engaging multi-hour session. At least, that's what has happened to me every time I've fired it up so far. Each time I've played Hood, despite its concept not being the best elevator pitch, I found myself drawn in more and more than I expected. Its ability to mix its many borrowed ideas with just enough of its own spice is probably its strongest quality and the main reason you'll likely find yourself hooked as well if you enjoy this sort of game. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and enabling all notifications by clicking the bell icon. With that out of the way, let's get started. Now, saying this sort of game might be a bit misleading though, and that's what brings me to my first point about Hood. It very much feels like its own thing much of the time. The special brew that Sumo Newcastle has concocted here is one that feels like a more structured single-player stealth game than anything you'd find in the multiplayer department, yet it still manages to feel like the multiplayer aspect is entirely organic and necessary to the overall experience. On paper, this might seem like what you would get if you mixed A Plague Tale Innocence with For Honor, but when you actually play it, it feels like much more of its own breed of multiplayer game than just a combination of vaguely familiar elements, which is a huge part of why it works. After a thankfully brief and useful training level goes over the basics with you, you'll be taken to your hideout, where you can change characters, weapons, clothing, and go over your personal objectives and challenges. Once you're ready for the smoke, you can choose to enter a full match with 7 other players, or a one-sided training mission, which is basically the same thing but without the opposing team, just your band of merry men going up against the AI. I highly recommend trying at least a couple rounds of this before jumping into the main game, as understanding the different characters and having some familiarity with the game's 3 main tasks is a must if you want to be very productive in the main experience. Once you've done that, you'll quickly realize Hood is mostly focused on achieving objectives with your ragtag team of merry men, while another team tries to do the same. Only one team of 4 can win though, so you'll be facing off against AI guards and officers, aka the state, while also throwing down with players on the other team of bandits, as you inevitably come into conflict with them. The main tasks include pickpocketing a key from each map's invincible, bloodthirsty sheriff, obtaining the treasure, and extracting said treasure by using one of the level's available winches in a prolonged process of somebody working the crank while others hopefully defend the area. As with any multiplayer gameplay loop, it doesn't always go as intended though. Some teams will just decide to bum rush the AI guards, which will eventually alert the sheriff, causing him to start marauding around after them, which makes him much harder to pickpocket and thus can turn the pace of the match on its head. But even then, there is still plenty of fun to be had. Sneaking around the outskirts of the commotion can yield dividends for a good team, as it allows you to claim advantageous spawn points, find additional items, and locate other points of interest before the rest. This can give you and your team an advantage well before any of the main objectives are even done. So, while nothing can prevent all matches from descending into chaos, or guarantee that they'll get back on track, Hood does a pretty good job of incentivizing you to play as intended by rewarding those who are actually good at the game. Experience is also awarded for doing other peripheral tasks and completing your own individual challenges though, so there's almost always something to work towards and be rewarded for, even if a match does fall into complete disarray. The moment-to-moment gameplay is what matters most here though, and the good news is that Hood mostly nails it. Hood has 4 characters at launch: John, the aggressive brute, Robin, the sniper, Marianne, the stealthy assassin, and Took, the flail-wielding mystic. Robin's arrows and Marianne's mini crossbow reward a good shot and incentivize keeping a healthy distance, while Took's flail and John's hammer can make short work of unprepared opponents. With the added abilities of Took's healing and highlighting of enemies, Marianne's ability to go invisible predator style and pull off a string of easy stealth kills, John's berserk mode, and Robin's exploding arrows, they all have great reasons to be selected, and nobody feels redundant or unnecessary. They all have their own gear items and perks that add to their appeal the more you play them too. Presentation is also surprisingly solid. I don't know if I'm just used to multiplayer games being half broken at launch, or if Hood is some sort of rare exception. But either way, Hood looks great. The medieval aesthetic fits the darker tone that they're going for about as well as you would expect. Outside of a few lighting effects popping in at the beginning of a match, I didn't come across much in the way of glitches either. The graphics overall, I'd say, are about on par with what we've seen from upper mid-tier games this past generation, with characters and environments looking sharp, albeit a bit drab, but that seems to be a deliberate choice given the time period. You'll occasionally notice some cool effects, like twilight beams poking through trees and down on characters in the environment, but nothing too crazy. The audio package isn't anything super special either, but it does get the job done, with the highlights being some tense music and short murmurings from fellow characters, letting you know that certain tasks are completed. It's not a showcase for that new set of speakers, but the audio in Hood accomplishes what it needs to and fits the mood well. That's not to say I didn't develop a few gripes with Hood, Outlaws, and Legends along the way though. While the 4 available characters are varied enough that most playstyles will feel catered to, another 1 or 2 of them would have gone a long way. With teams being able to have every available character in each match, Hood misses an opportunity for way more interesting matchups that the addition of a 5th character would inevitably create. The fact that there aren't more choices than available slots makes character selection less interesting than it would otherwise be. There's basically nothing for you to consider other than perhaps wanting one of each on your team for the sake of balance. Despite the characters themselves being fun to play as they are, it always just feels shy of being enough. Similarly, I also would have liked to have seen at least one more mode than the standard 4v4. You could consider the training matches a way to mix things up a tad, but given that they don't add to your experience points or yield any money for you, there's little reason to play them after your training wheels have come off. Despite me enjoying my time with the basic PvPvE mode, I couldn't shake the feeling that one more mode would have gone a long way. I can understand why the developers probably don't want to risk splitting the player base up too much, but one additional mode surely wouldn't have hurt. Perhaps something that resembles the training missions by putting one team up against an aggressive AI army, or putting 2 teams up against each other deathmatch style without the AI at all, would have really rounded out the game better. Either that, or some sort of variation of the 3 basic tasks each match entails would have been nice. Even as a low-priced game, I'd like to see more meat on the bone here. Perhaps they will add more later, but as of now, it is a bit thin, even for just $30. Despite some of the elements of Hood feeling a tad on the shallow side, what is here works great for what it is. It manages to bring a welcome twist to the cooperative multiplayer formula by introducing stealth, AI opponents, and fun tasks into the mix. The fact that it's a Robin Hood game might help it move some units in the short term, but when all is said and done, it will be Hood's well-crafted characters, polished gameplay, and surprisingly long list of goals to work toward that will actually define the experience for most. While I would have gladly welcomed more characters and modes for the asking price, what is here is executed well enough that fans of stealth, unique multiplayer games, or anybody just looking for something a little different have plenty of reason to give it a shot. That's all for now. If you enjoy what you saw, please hit the like button. And if you're new to the channel, now is a great time to subscribe. We upload brand new videos every single day. After subscribing, don't forget to enable all notifications.